So this is something that just happened to me, and if anyone has experienced anything like it, please let me know that I am not going insane. I work at a solar farm, and I had to go in tonight to refuel the generators that keep our equipment charged overnight. The whole time I'm out there, I feel like something is wrong, like something is watching me. I have always had a strange sixth sense for when something bad is about to happen. My left ear goes deaf, and my right ear starts to ring really high-pitched and loud. This always happens right before something bad happens. The whole time I'm filling up the generators, my ear is ringing like crazy, worse than it ever has before. So I'm really freaked out at this point. But then, things went weird to downright freaky. Stuff started either falling or falling over that shouldn't be able to on its own. There were two things that I noticed, and probably more that I didn't. The first thing was a small solar panel used to charge the trailer batteries during the day. I heard it fall, but I didn't see it happen. I, at first, figured that it was just me walking around in the trailer beforehand that coerced her into falling. But upon closer inspection, it was previously zip-tied to the trailer, and zip ties don't just snap for no reason. At this point, I'm really spooked and starting to freak out a little, but I kept at my work. However, later on that night, when I was filling up the gas tank I used to fill the generators, I set one behind me and started filling the next one. But when I turned around to pick up the gas can, it was on its side spilling out onto the ground. The really scary part of the gas can being on its side is that I didn't hear it fall. It's almost like it was picked up and set on its side by something or someone. So I finished up my work as fast as humanly possible and got the hell out of Dodge. But when I was driving away, I drove under a street lamp and looked in the rearview mirror, and there was just a guy standing in the middle of the road. I didn't see him when I drove past the light, and there wasn't anywhere for him to hide that was close enough to the road where I wouldn't have seen him. So that's my paranormal experience. If anyone has any info on what the hell just happened to me, please let me know, and feel free to PM me with any information. This is not a fictional story. This happened, and I'm still really freaked out. So I literally just posted this on Creepy Encounters, but I saw this group and I wanted to post this story here. I don't know how to tell this story without sounding crazy or nutty, but thinking about it still gives me chills to this day, especially since it still makes no sense to me at all. Maybe someone can help me figure out what I saw. Alright, this is my story. I was walking through the city I was living in on a snowy Saturday, heading to a friend's house. There was a good bit of snow on the ground, and for what is usually a busy city, it was dead outside. I saw maybe 5 or 6 cars on my 20-minute walk, and maybe 10 people along the way. But when I was about 3 minutes from my buddy's house, I saw this kid crossing the street with a backpack on. At first, I didn't think anything of him, but as we got closer, I got a really off feeling in my gut. I went from a happy mindset to feeling sick, fearful, and cautious in an instant. I was initially staring at the ground when crossing, but the feeling made me look up at the kid. He was a few feet in front of me, staring me dead in the eyes. When I locked eyes with his, I noticed something was wrong with his eyes and his smile. His pupils were huge and yellow, with narrow oval slits down the middle, kind of like snake eyes. I remember him blinking, but his eyelids never moved. He had an evil smirk on his face, which made me feel nervous. When we passed each other, I looked back behind me, and as my head turned completely, he looked back and gave me a smile. And through the small slit of his lips, I saw his teeth. Each one was separated by a small gap, and his teeth were kind of pointed. I turned back around and kept walking, but when I got to the other side of the street, I stopped for a second, and the feeling disappeared. I looked back around, and the kid was gone. There was nowhere he could have turned, ran, or hid, nor did he have a reason to run or hide. I told my friend when I got to his house, and he thought I was crazy. But I know what I saw, and the feeling I had, and it was real as the ground we stand on. Has anyone ever had anything happen like this to them? Can anyone help explain what I may have seen? My mother and I were, on one fine sunny day, driving along the side of a hill from which you could see the glimpse of a broad river estuary which divides the city in which we live. All of a sudden, there appeared in the center of the widest part of the river a fuming golden object, probably about the size of a car and clearly floating slightly above the waves. It looked as though it was made from the finest gold, and also like an incredibly bright beam of light was somehow being projected upon it and then being reflected back out from its form and into a visible haze of bright golden yellow light so intense that I strained to see what lay at its heart. At that time, I had incredibly good eyesight, above 20/20, and even from this great distance, I could make out what looked momentarily as though there were two human male figures in robes standing atop some kind of platform, open and horseshoe-shaped, and not fully enclosed so that it was open in the back, somewhat like an ancient chariot. One of these two humanoid figures appeared to be gesturing to the other, as though explaining something to him. As my mother was driving and concentrating on the road, I noticed it first, in between the houses as we drove along, and then said, "Hey, Mom, look at that." My mother saw it as well, and asked me in equal amazement, "What is that?" I could tell at the time, from the look in her eyes, that she was seeing not entirely with her physical being. She had this look on her face that I've seen her get before, when she sometimes might answer a question with a request for you to repeat it, while still lost deep in thought and not really present. I really wished that we'd not been so busy, and had been free to stop driving and look at it some more. But we both just kept looking over the side of the road, hoping to once again pick up a glimpse of it through the passing houses, but instead it was once again gone. After it was quite obviously no longer visible, or even there anymore, which was after an entirety of about 30 seconds, I asked, "I wonder what that was?" To which my mother replied, "Oh, well, whatever it was, it's gone now," and we continued on our way. I was pretty disappointed that we didn't stop to get a better look at it, but she was driving and we were in a hurry to get to our next job. I thought that the presence of something, which would have been so amazing looking, and being golden and floating above the river, clearly visible to the entirety of the city, and so very distinctive and incredibly odd in nature, might have registered as a local news item. But there was nothing said anywhere about it on the news or in the newspaper. This was still in 2003 and the net was still a toddler. Years later, I asked my mother about that day and what she thought it might have been, but she had no recollection of that experience at all. However, there's nothing particularly odd about that. Just for reference, the river where this occurred is incredibly deep, and makes for the deepest port in the southern hemisphere, where the biggest warships in the US fleet can pull right up next to the dock. And it empties in the direction of the next and last destination before a geographical reset, that is the Antarctic. Does anyone have any ideas what it was that we may have seen that day? This was a long time ago, when I was young and probably an 8th grader. My grandma was in the hospital with pneumonia, and everything seemed to be alright. She looked as if she was going to recover. Then, one night on a school night, I was woken up at 11 with my sister saying we need to go to our cousin's house. I was always seen as a mature kid, and have taken care of my cousins and sisters before, so when we showed up to my cousin's house, my parents said they needed to go to the hospital. My aunt and uncle packed up with my parents and left for the hospital. I was left in charge of my sister and cousins. My 2 older cousins slept in the same room together, and their bed had a pull-out bed under it, so my sister crashed into that bed. My younger cousin was about 2 or so, and he still slept in a crib-type bed in another room. I decided to crash on the couch. Later that morning, I wake up and my aunt thanks me for watching the kids. She then tells me that my grandma passed away last night. This is where it gets weird. I slept right outside the kitchen. My little baby cousin woke up with a sipping cup of hot chocolate. But I didn't make that cup, and I doubt any of the other kids could make that cup without moving some furniture around to get the microwave, and if they did, I would have surely heard it. My aunt then asks him who made it, and he tells us that Grandma made it for him last night. I believe my grandma came to visit all of her grandchildren one last time before she left. I'm not sure if this is the right place to post this, and it's definitely not as out of pocket as most of the posts on here, but I've always thought it was interesting. When we were younger, my sister used to faint pretty frequently. The first time it ever happened, she had gotten up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and collapsed in front of the sink. Luckily, there was a brand new family pack of toilet paper rolls in the corner that cushioned her fall, so she wasn't hurt. But this also meant that it didn't make a loud enough sound to wake anyone up in the middle of the night. Regardless of this, my mom somehow woke up and found my sister while she was still unconscious on the bathroom floor. When my sister faints, She's only completely unconscious for a few seconds before coming to again, which means that my mom would have had to have woken up as soon as the fall happened. It's unlikely that any noise woke her up because the toilet paper muffled it, and my sister was pretty young and small, so she wouldn't have made a very loud crash anyways. My room was closest to the bathroom, and I didn't hear a thing. Also, my parents had their own bathroom in their room, so even if my mom had woken up at the perfect moment by chance, there's no reason she would have needed to go outside of her bedroom to the kids' bathroom. Mom describes it as mother's instinct, and claims that she suddenly woke up for no reason and just had a feeling that one of her kids was in trouble. She went to check on us and saw the bathroom light on, and that's when she found my sister. I'm sure there's a million other explanations for this, and maybe my mom did hear some kind of thump that didn't register in her sleepy mind, but I think it's interesting and kind of sweet to believe the mother's instinct version. So this happened roughly 6 years ago in Pennsylvania, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I was working for Burger King at the time, and I just got off my night shift at roughly midnight. As I was driving home, I saw a light that was about 50 feet off the ground. It had an orangish glow like a street light. I could see it very clearly. The night sky was clear, no fog at all. I thought it was just a new streetlight that got put up. I just kept staring at it. Then, out of nowhere, it shot straight up into the air and just vanished. It gave me chills and made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Ever since that day, I always look at the sky on my drive home from my job that I have now. Could it have been extraterrestrial? I don't really know if this was a UFO, but that's all I can think of. Okay, so as the title says, I don't know if this was a UFO or not because I was inside when it happened. It was after one of my parents' parties, and a whole lot of people were sleeping, except me and my dog. I was trying to go to sleep in my room, but I couldn't. I closed my eyes thinking I would fall asleep if I did. Next thing I know, my dog is freaking out and wants to get out of my room as soon as possible. I hear this humming and buzzing surrounding the room, along with these vertical lines of light moving, coming from the window in front of me. So me and my dog leave that room quickly, and my home speakers were playing music with the volume getting louder. My parents and their friends just woke up and act like nothing happened at all. I still don't know why this happened. I checked the phones afterwards, and Spotify wasn't even open. It's been like 1.5, maybe 2 years since then, but I still remember it so well. Nothing like this has ever happened since. I just wanted to share my story, even though it wasn't that crazy. I posted this in Ask Reddit, but got the usual skeptical replies, so I'm posting here. Number 1. When I was staying at a friend's house about 20 years ago, me and my friend were sitting on the couch watching TV. My friend's mom had just left to run to the store to get something. There was a blizzard coming in, and it had already started snowing. While watching TV, I got this unexplainable urge to lay over the couch right as my friend, without saying a word, stood up and started walking back to his bedroom. Right as my head hit the couch, I hear the TV go to static and come back on after what seemed like an instant. I sat back up, confused as hell, and I hear my friend from his room say, "What the hell just happened?" He said he laid down on the bed and had a similar experience to mine. He also said he had no idea why he went to his room. About 5 minutes later, my friend's mom shows back up apologizing for taking so long. It felt like she hadn't been gone for more than 5 minutes. Number 2. I was heading home from Christmas at my grandparents' place with my wife and young daughter. We were taking the short way home, which involved taking some very rural roads with almost no traffic. Keep in mind that I have driven this route at least 100 times. I look down at the stereo to change a track or station, not sure which, and the speakers start making a popping sound, then the radio goes dead. My wife yells, "Oh my god, what just happened? We're freaking stopped." I asked her what she was talking about, and she said the whole sky flashed pink and purple. Then we started freaking out. My daughter in the back seat was unbuckled, her shoes were off, my wife's shoes were untied. She never untied them, she always slipped them off and on. Weird, I know. And when we started driving again, I realized that we were about 10 miles past our turn. These are just a couple stories out of many. Most people laugh and tell me that I'm full of crap, but I'm telling you, this stuff can't be explained away. I don't care if people believe me either. I know it happened. I'd really like to hear other people's stories. I truly believe this is an ongoing thing that people are too embarrassed to admit. Just trust me, you are not alone. This past Friday, just after midnight, no drugs unless you count an energy drink, and I'm often up late due to my work schedule, so I wasn't remotely tired. I got off work, packed a suitcase for a long weekend visit to some friends about an hour and a half north of me. This is in the Austin area. I left my house, and my car has a moonroof, which I had open. A couple blocks from my house, I noticed a flying object over me at about height for a plane, but had way more lights. Some green, some white, some blinking super fast. I have never seen a plane or helicopter blink at that speed. It was too large to be a drone. I thought it was a weird plane as it started to fly away over the trees. I turned a few streets and there it was again. It followed me on and off for 10 minutes up I-35, kept returning to hover over my car about 100 to 150 feet up. Not much traffic due to the late hour, so seemed obviously over me specifically. It took off at an alarmingly high speed to the east and didn't return. No sounds. I haven't told anyone I know in real life, because I'm pretty sure they'd think I was nuts. Has anyone else seen this dude around then? I was looking for stars and meteors in the middle of the night. At 3 a.m., I wanted to go home, but before, I wanted to take one last look. I went into a dark, really dark, driveway to take that last look. Then I saw, moving from east to west, a view like through a magnifying glass. I could see the stars through it, but they were a bit stretched. And outside the middle, the stars were moving around the center. It looked a little like those pictures of a gravitational lens. It was moving at a slow speed, in a straight line, and I could see the effect from where I was, straight above me, for 20 to 30 seconds up to the horizon. It had a size of maybe 15 to 20 meters. I couldn't calculate its height, so it could have been even bigger. It was a warm summer night with an absolutely clear view, and I still don't know what that was. This happened a long time ago. I'm 26 now, and I was about 16 to 18 years old at the time. I just want to put my experience here so I can remember it and be able to look back and read it when I'm way older. I lived in a remote area off the side of Highway 69 here in northern Ontario. It was wooded forests, swampy marshes here and there, wintertime, snowy, but I forget the time and date. Me and my girlfriend at the time were at her place alone for the night. We hung out, watched movies, etc. We were going to sleep when we started to hear the dog outside whimpering. Now this little dog barks like a damn maniac at anyone or anything coming close to the driveway. The house was the last one on the long dirt road that leads further onto the Georgian Bay. Mind you, we are only like 600 meters from the highway, if that. Just some insight. Anyways, after a few moments of the dog whimpering, we hear something start to slowly come up the front stairs. These are the type of stairs that go up to the side of a house and directly to the door. These stairs passed by the living room window. It sounded like a bipedal thing slowly stepping up each step with a loud thud that seemed to slightly shake the porch or house or something. Like real aggressive coming up, but still slow and content. While this was happening, I'm asking my girlfriend if she knew who it could be. A drunk neighbor, maybe? She said she didn't know. We were super freaked at this time, and we were already freaked out at the dog whimpering. The amount of fear I had was overwhelming from the sound this thing made. It sounded large. The thing got to the front door, which was very close to her bedroom, and made a huge bang or thud on the door. Not in a knocking manner. This knock kinda shook the entire side of the building. It did this about 7 times, each about the same effort. We freaked a ton laying there while this was happening, because you could just feel that it was bad. The thing walked back down the steps the same way it came up. We laid there forever waiting for something else, like a window tap or something. The whole time freaked right out. We then got up and went to check the front living room window. The dog wasn't whimpering, but still hiding in his doghouse at the bottom of the stairs. The light on the porch was on, and we didn't see any footprints. None in the driveway, none up the road towards the neighbors, nor the highway. It creeps me out thinking about that time. It just came upstairs and banged on the door real hard about 7 times, then walked back down the steps and left, I guess. The presence gave off really bad vibes, and was just creepy and overwhelming. I know it couldn't have been a person. That's all I know. Anyone know what it may have been? I have experienced different paranormal things and events throughout my life, and have always been an on-the-fence believer. Working in theaters for so many years, I'd heard things often, seen a few things here and there, but nothing got under my skin as much as the subliminal haunting I experienced. I had just moved with my parents into an older house in a new state and town. The previous owner had left a lot of things behind, mainly storage bins in the attic and a few decorations. I would always find the most interesting things in my room. I was in my 2nd year of undergrad and staying home for the summer, and I started having these dreams. In these dreams, I was always very sick and dying, or someone I loved was dying, and they needed a bone marrow transplant to live. I dreamt about this every night until I left to go back to school. Then, I was obsessing over it. All I could think about was donating bone marrow, to the point that when I heard a Be The Match rep was coming to my campus, I signed up to donate with them without even thinking twice. As soon as I signed up, the dreams and obsessions stopped. It was like I was finally calm and all this deep-rooted anxiety left me. I texted my mom that I had made a big decision and wanted to call and talk to her, and she called me almost immediately. "The weirdest thing happened to me today," she said. I told her that I had had a weird day too, but she continued. "There was a 5K that went through our neighborhood today. I asked around to figure out what it was for, and it turns out it's a race to raise money for this bone marrow transplant charity in honor of the woman who used to live in our house. She died waiting on a transplant? Isn't that weird? And we didn't even know it." Sometimes seeing things or hearing things aren't as scary as feeling things deep inside, like the need to help when someone is in need, even if that someone isn't alive anymore. A call for help beyond the grave? I stayed on the list for a full 3 years, and plan to continue being available as a donor. I urge you all to look up bethematch.org and consider making a commitment too. So here's a little backstory. From a young age, I lived with my grandparents in their house with my older brother. My garage was haunted, I guess, by a man who had lived there and passed away previously. He wasn't evil or anything. He just wasn't too happy when people went into his space, the garage, and he never left his place. I never told anyone in my house that I could feel his presence, as I didn't want to be made fun of. But on New Year's Eve of 2016, we were all around our neighbor's house, and my grandma brought it up. She said that it was haunted, and everyone kept saying, "Nah, it's not." And I looked at them all and explained that it is, and I felt the presence as well. No one believed us. Knowing about the presence in the garage, I can get on with my story. From a very young age, I was afraid of the dark. You know, just an average fear. I used to hear noises in my right ear, and I would always feel like something was standing by my door watching me. This happened every night from when I was 7 until I was 14. It got worse and worse as I got older though. It started out with just a bad feeling that I could brush off to an intense fear of something being there that didn't feel good at all. I would wake up dripping in sweat because I was so scared. I heard noises, and sometimes felt like I couldn't even breathe. But one night, things went too far. It was like every other night. I woke up in the early hours of the morning, around 2:45, and broke into a cold sweat. It was all silent for about 10 minutes, then I heard the cutlery drawer from the kitchen downstairs being opened and fiddled with. At first I thought it was my granddad, but he was snoring his head off in bed. Then I thought Grandma must be down there. But then she coughs in her sleep, and a chill went down my spine because it wasn't my brother either, as he was at his mate's house. I was petrified and decided to close my eyes, but then I heard someone walking up our creaking stairs. Being the 12-year-old I was, I hid under my blanket, closed my eyes, and faced the wall. Whatever came up the stairs came into my room and stood in front of my bed, breathing heavily into my ear. I held my eyes shut, and then out of nowhere, my duvet was pulled off me and flung to the end of my bed. I was completely paralyzed and my heart was pounding as I heard the heavy breathing next to my ear. After a minute or so, the thing left my room, but I was paralyzed for at least another 5 minutes. As soon as I regained movement, I grabbed my covers over my head and forced myself back to sleep. It has never happened since, but to this day, no one has ever believed me, and they blame it on an active imagination or sleep paralysis. And I don't suffer from sleep paralysis at all. If anyone has any idea of what it could have been, I'm open to hear suggestions. Today I decided to go with a few of my friends to a pretty popular haunted bridge in my town. Tourists come here to experience creepy encounters and such. Anyways, the story behind Thea Rosa's bridge is that a Native American woman was running from some bandits with her baby when she came across a creek and threw her baby into it in hopes that the bandits would not torture it. The baby did not survive, and neither did she. Right away when we get there, we start hearing footsteps and stuff all around us. We heard a group of people under the bridge, but when we went under there, nobody was there, and we only found a lone leg bone of something kind of small. When we went back to the bridge, we heard movement again. 2 of my friends got creeped out and went back to the car, but me and my other friends stayed. We did the ritual which you are supposed to do there, which was going to the ledge and saying, Thea Rosa, I have your baby." Then we started hearing faint crying sounds and footsteps coming toward us as the crying got louder. We went back to the car, and as we were walking back, I looked back to the creek and saw a dark figure just hovering. I don't know what it was, but we hauled ass back to the car after my friend asked me if I saw it too. Alright, so basically, I've known this guy since before I was born. He was one of my dad's closest friends, and was even his partner in managing their gym. Let's just call him Jay. Jay was the sweetest guy I knew, always helping my family out, whether it be with moving after we got evicted, or giving us his old car after ours broke down for good. Just a few months ago, Jay got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. No one had seen it coming since he had no noticeable symptoms, and my Uncle Doc, another one of my dad's pals, was a doctor for 50 years and saw Jay every day at the gym. I lived, and still do, live thousands of miles away from the gym in California. So visiting him wasn't an option for me and my family. Anyway, we all knew he had only a few weeks left before he passed, and no one could do anything about it. Even worse, his wife had to deal with it all firsthand. Obviously, everyone that knew Jay was insanely sad and miserable. I guess sharing this post is my way of finally accepting that he's gone. It was a clear night, and I was staying up late listening to music at my desk. The pale moonlight has a way of drifting into my room through the large window, so that was all the light I needed. All of a sudden, I get an uncomfortably large bit of sadness, like a heavy weight just plopped itself on my shoulders. Then, I smell Jay's signature cologne, as well as the feeling of a gentle hand on my right shoulder. I tear up. Being 14, I didn't really know how to handle it, so I just went into my mom's room and laid down. I think Jay died, Mom. I had no way of knowing for sure since my mom turns off the Wi-Fi at night, so no one could have told me. But that morning, my mom said that Jay passed on in the night, around the same time he came to say goodbye, 11 p.m. His pictures are hung up everywhere along the gym, and there's a glass case filled with all of his trophies, shoes, etc. I never did get to see him again, and I regret not saying hi to him the last time that I saw him. Enjoy people while they're still around, because you never know when life will decide that their time is up. So about 12 years ago, when I was around 7, my mom was dating my stepdad. He lived in the downstairs room/apartment of his boss's house. Just for clarification, his boss's house was a 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom, and then downstairs there was a garage, and on the other side of a garage was the room. It was much like an add-on suite. It had its own bathroom and living room and bedroom. Anyways, my mom and I would often go over to their house. We were all friends, and my stepdad's boss even had kids my age, so we would play together. There are a number of paranormal experiences that happened in that house. At night, you wouldn't want to leave the room you were in because the house just had this overwhelming eerie feeling. You would hear random doors open and close, and lights would just magically turn on. The TV turned on almost every night. Now, I didn't live there, and I often refused to sleep there, so half the things I'm going to say are just from what my mom has told me. One night, my mom was sleeping in the spare room upstairs in the main house. She woke up in the middle of the night to find a little girl hovering upside down, just staring at her. She said she couldn't move or blink or talk. After 3 minutes, she said the girl had disappeared and she was able to move again. She left the room as soon as she could. The creepiest thing that ever occurred was when my mom and I came to the house one day, we heard a very loud banging on the garage door, and it sounded like Amber, the boss's wife, was screaming for help. My mom quickly unlocked the garage door and opened it just to find it completely empty, and no one was even home. We left right after that. In my stepdad's suite, they decided to remodel and change the floor from the gross old carpet to hardwood. After tearing up the beaten old carpet, they found satanic symbols all over the floorboards. In the garage, there was this tiny door that led to a basement-like thing. It was really like a crawl space, but it was tall enough for someone 5 foot and under to stand in. In there, they found writing on the walls saying, "F you, Daddy, and go to hell." They also found a very large box, large enough to fit a human inside of it. I'm not sure why, but towards the end of Amber and the boss renting the house, they decided they should burn the box, and when they did it, the ashes left the shape of a human body from the torso up. Nothing was in the box except a bunch of hate letters addressed to the girl's father. After burning the box, all the paranormal experiences stopped, but they moved a couple months after that. My whole town burnt down last year in November, so hopefully that horrible house went down in flames. A few months ago, my fiance and I went over to her sister's house for a night of drinking, and ended up crashing in a bedroom in her basement. At some point in the night, she cuddles up next to me very close, and I awake to her clutching my chest. I drunkenly ask what's wrong, and pass back out. The next day, I ask what happened. She said she'd woken up feeling like she was being watched, and looked up to see an old man leaning over the bed, grimacing at her. Today, mere minutes ago, Christmas 2018, we're over at her sister's house, and we're watching Ghostbusters 2. The movie finishes, and the son starts playing with his toys and says, "There's a ghost in this house, a man. He fell off the roof, and now he's in a bad mood. He's buried under the house." Oh, get me out. To begin, I apologize if this is the incorrect subreddit or an inquiry that isn't allowed here. I posted this on our cryptozoology, but after giving it a bit of thought, I believe this may be some sort of supernatural entity. Anyways, a bit of backstory. I live next to a heavily wooded area, as we call it back in the boonies, in Virginia. I walk up and down our large driveway with my dog to exercise on my days off work. This morning, I was walking down my driveway as usual, with my dog trotting beside me, and this is where things get bizarre. I heard rustling in the tall ferns next to me. I look over to see the rear end of a thin, lanky, pure white creature walking into the trees. I initially thought it was an albino deer, as it had a similar body type. My dog instinctively ran down to chase it. As the creature approached a large hill running up into the rest of the wooded area, my dog froze, like as still as a statue. He didn't bark or move a muscle. He wouldn't respond when I called for him. Now, my dog is a large, territorial boxer hound mix. The kind of dog that is sweet towards those who he is close to, but would give his life to defend his home. Since I live next to the woods, there are many woodland critters running around. You will often hear my dog chasing and howling at these animals throughout the day. Basically, it was odd for him not to chase after this creature that was so close to him. I've never seen him freeze like that before. And that's when I saw the creature moving up the hill, on 2 legs. It was like it transitioned from a quadruped into a biped in an instant. It moved insanely fast, given how it appeared to struggle to walk. I'm not really sure how to describe it. It just lurched, like each step was painful for it, yet it knew what it was doing. It was similar to waddling, but more jagged? I caught a glimpse of its pelt then, and it wasn't the creamy sort of color albino animals typically have, but it was pure white, like it was some sort of ivory silhouette. I didn't see the rippling of muscles beneath it or anything. It was just like a white sheet. In that moment, I saw a pair of deer flank its side and stand as motionless as my dog was until it passed. They then bolted off into the trees, as if frightened. Once the creature was out of sight, my dog ran over to me as if broken from a trance. He seemed a lot more anxious after this encounter as well. Once again, I apologize if this isn't the right place for this, and if so, please direct me to the right sub for this inquiry. I'm extremely bewildered and somewhat frightened of this unknown creature residing near my home. At least if I can pinpoint what it is, I can feel a bit safer. Giving an identity to the unknown can help me take precautions. I used to live in a small city by the sea, which bordered into the countryside. My house was near the countryside, which had a large patch of really thick woods. Usually I would go out with my friends. Keep in mind this story happened when I was around 11, and one day we decided to venture into the woods to make a den. When out there, my friend told me of people going out late at night and seeing things which I just shrugged off as a ghost story. We reached a patch of open land, which we decided to build our den at. I went into the woods to get some large fallen branches to build with, when I noticed there was a jar of ashes amongst the tree and bushes. Obviously freaked out, I turned to go back to my friends when I noticed large scratch marks on the trees, which were too big to be a cat and didn't look like it was made by a knife. I went back to my friends, and since it was getting dark at this point and we were freaked out, we decided to go home. We started walking back through the trees to find our way back. We got separated since we had to go different ways to get home. I was on edge the whole way, and once I was almost at the edge of the woods, I saw something big dash through the trees, extremely fast, and heard branches and leaves snap. At this point, I was too scared to stick around, and I ran home. I'm not sure what it was. Until this day, according to old friends, people still talk about the woods being off. If you guys have any idea as to what it is, I would love to hear your theories. Also, I don't believe this to be my friends. So I want to start off by saying that I don't believe in ghosts, though I have seen them. I believe it could be some kind of residual energy crossing through time, but not necessarily an entity itself. The first encounter I had was in my bed as a young girl. I was maybe around 8 at the time. I woke up randomly around 2 a.m. and opened my eyes, and at the edge of the bed below my knees, I saw a small child around 2 gripping the sheets while standing. I could only see the top half of the child's face and its hands. I will never forget those eyes. Huge, round eyes looking petrified, just staring right into my soul. The child had curly hair and reminded me of my friend's kid brother. I remember shutting my eyes as tight as I could and pulling the covers over my head for safety. Years after we moved out of that house, I recalled the story as I had many times before. I was around 16 now. My mom got very grim and said that I need to tell you something now that we're out of the house. A very young girl who was very sick died in that house, and your bedroom was her bedroom. I never wanted to tell you before because I didn't want to freak you out, but it has gave me the creeps all these years. Another time when I was around 9 or so, my mom was in bed with me reading to me The Doll People. It was our favorite book. I was never allowed to have a door for my room, so you could see out into the hallway. All the lights had been shut off at this point, except in my bedroom, and my dad was already asleep. Whilst my mom was reading along, I suddenly saw my dad walk down the hallway toward the stairs, but didn't hear him go down our staircase. The house was old, and the stairs creaked every time you used them, so I would have heard him. I remember he was wearing a red flannel shirt and dark jeans, but didn't get a good look at his face since the lights were off. I turned my head around to peek the corner of the doorway where he would have been standing at the landing. I saw for a brief moment a man who looked like my dad walking down the first few steps. He wasn't walking, though. It was like he floated and disappeared from the feet up into the darkness. I called out, "Dad? Dad?" And he didn't answer. My mom assured me he was in bed and didn't walk across the hallway. That moment, the air got still. There was a very loud, odd static sound. There was a green laser-like line of light that formed from the middle of the room across the entire room, and then it stopped, and the air was still again. "What the heck was that?" I asked. My mom froze and said, "You saw that too?" So we both had the same experience. I can't explain these events, but they are 100% true. I still don't believe in ghosts despite seeing them. I have also seen shadow people in that house, all over. My mom told me long after we moved that she had also seen shadow people consistently throughout the house. We never had any experiences after moving. It seems that whatever energy was there is kept within the walls of that house itself. I am just thankful not to have had any more encounters post-move, as they were quite terrifying. This is something that I didn't realize the severity of until I was older. My mom had left me and my brother home alone. It was midday. My brother was 12, maybe 13, so I was 9 years old. I was watching him play Xbox in our living room. He had his headset on and was talking to his friends. There was a knock from the door in our carport. I run and answer the door without looking. It's a grown man that I've never seen before. We are separated by the screen door, which at the time was unlocked. He asks, "Are your parents home?" Horror washes over me. First of all, he's knocking from the carport, which is strange in and of itself. A stranger would knock on the front door. And our carport is empty. We only had one car, and my mother had taken it. This man knew that my parents weren't home. So I'm afraid, but I don't know why. But I am scared. Immediately, my brother in the other room comes to mind. I've never had a father figure. My brother has always been the one who has made me feel safe. He was the strongest person to me in the whole world. Someone who could protect me in any situation. How most people would regard their father, I think. I feel as though I can barely speak. Wide-eyed, I manage to stutter out, "No, but my, big brother's here." Without even a moment's pause, this man reaches for the screen door and starts to open it. Like an act of God, divine intervention, an arm reaches out from behind me over my shoulder and grabs the door. My brother pushes past me, holding the door, forcing the man back with his presence, out into the carport, and closes the door behind him. This man tells my brother he was looking to buy some crappy old swing set that was in our front yard at the time. My brother comes back in without saying anything to me, puts on his headset, and continues playing. I sit down as well and continue watching him. I don't believe we ever told our mom. It pretty much fades from my memory, but as I've gotten older, it's become one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me. Creepy not so much because of what happened, but what could have happened. Unnerving how absolutely oblivious we were. I like to think the man was planning to lock me in a room, rob the place, and leave, but people can be so evil. I have read a lot of these stories, and I couldn't remember if I had had any somewhat odd encounters. But when I was tidying my room this weekend, I found my old diary from when I was around 9 or 10. Before I moved to Berlin, my mom and I lived in Sheffield. Because of this, we sometimes met some of her friends when we went back to Sheffield. This time, though, they came to visit us, and we decided to spend the day out. Now, I had never had a creepy encounter before, but on this day, I'd had two. First, we went to the park. Me and my little sisters were all playing together, having a good time, whilst my mom and dad were chatting to their two friends, one of which was my fairy godmother. We're not religious, so my mom just always called her that. After a while, a panicked woman and her kid walked into the park and told my mom and other parents that a weird man was walking around asking people if they wanted to touch his snake. But as she said it in German, though, it was clear that it wasn't a euphemism in this context. This man had a real snake, and was carrying it around, offering people to hold it. Apparently, this included offering it to this little girl who was crying her eyes out. My mom decided that it would be best if we got a move on, but my fairy godmother wanted a coffee, so we split up into 2 groups. My mom, fairy godmother, and myself, and my dad went with his mate and my 2 little sisters, who went to a different park further away. We went off to find a little cafe, and they both got a hot drink. We headed off to meet up with the rest, and I tripped. My mom and fairy godmother had walked in front of me, but they didn't notice me fall. Instead, a man grabbed my arm and held me tight. At first I thought he was trying to help me get up, but he was just holding my arm tightly. I completely froze and didn't say anything, so I had now been separated from my mom, and I couldn't see her anymore. The man just held on to me, and I didn't know what to do. My mom was about to cross the road when she noticed that I wasn't next to her and turned around, and she couldn't see me. She called my name, and I just looked up at the man, and he let go, which then made me fall back on the ground. My mom called me again, and the 2 of them started walking back to where I was on the floor, right past the man who was trying to nonchalantly jog past her. She saw that I was lying on the floor completely white and asked me what happened. As soon as I told her, my fairy godmother ran around the corner to where the man had been ever so casually jogging, leaving me with my mom who was holding me. Apparently, when she had looked around the corner, the man was legging it down the road and was already on the opposite side of the road, and my fairy godmother, not knowing Berlin at all, didn't know where he had run off to. Overall, nothing ever came of it, and seeing how I had forgotten that this even happened for nearly 10 years, I feel like I might have gotten off easy. A few years ago, a friend and I were hanging out at a park around 11 p.m. All the lights were off since the park was technically closed, and we were doing a bit of underage drinking and having a fairly fun night. After having struck up a conversation with some random people who had since left, we were both just kind of vibing separately. This park was flanked on the north and east side by streets, and the south and west side by mountains. We were at the far south end when I noticed a banging noise coming from the north end. I looked, and there was a man who seemed to be banging something fairly hard against the curb. The bangs were pretty loud, and were echoing all over. This park is in the middle of a neighborhood, however with it being late, there really wasn't anyone else around. I stared at him for a while, and then tried to get my friend's attention, all the while the banging continued. I turned to look at my friend who was in her own world doing something, and when I looked back towards the man, he had stopped banging and was now standing straight up and looking at me. Freaked out, I finally got my friend's attention right when the man began to run at us. We ran towards her car, which was parked in the southeast corner of the park on the street, looking back to see the man still running. We hurried into her car, and she began driving south, not realizing that this street ended just about 1/8 of a mile up the hill after some apartments. We got to the end of the street, and she began to try and turn around, when I saw out the back window that the car the man was originally standing next to was coming toward us. He attempted to block us in the dead end with his car, and in the passenger seat, I saw a young woman who looked as if she had been crying. I still remember her blonde curly hair and smeared mascara. We finally got away and turned onto the main road. Panicked, we called the police to tell them what had happened. Parking about 1/4 of a mile away, we saw 2 cop cars do a quick search of the area before ultimately not finding anything and leaving. To this day, I have no idea what that man was doing, why he came after us, or why the girl he was with seemed to be so distraught. I can only hope that it ended well. My childhood was spent in Santa Ana, California. I have pretty good memories there before my dad moved us down to Texas. There is one weird instance that I remembered, so I asked my mom about it and will now share it with you. We lived in this decently sized apartment complex. We were on the 4th floor, but there were up to 5 to 6 floors that I can remember. One of our upstairs neighbors was this beautiful Chinese lady named Sheila, with the cutest Pomeranian puppy. She was young, thin, had long black hair, and the prettiest eyes, and she wore the prettiest clothing. She would always call my sister and over to play with her puppy. Sometimes she would invite us inside her home. I remember her apartment seemed strange to me. All of her walls had shelves lined with porcelain dolls that I thought were very creepy. She also had Hello Kitty and Friends plushies all over her couch, and even on her floor. She had a huge pink frilly rug. I remember that as a child, something about her apartment seemed off. But I didn't care because I loved having a pretty older friend with a dog. Sheila took a particular liking to me. I'm a Mexican-American, but everyone has told me that I look Asian. This will be relevant later. Anywho, she kept on telling me I looked just like her porcelain dolls, and that I was so beautiful. I was flattered because I looked up to Sheila, almost like an older, cool sister. My sister and I started frequenting Sheila's apartment more often, mainly to play with the cute puppy. Her boyfriend started coming over more often as well. I remembered thinking he was too old for her and too ugly. I would catch him staring at me a lot, and at that time, I couldn't understand why, but he made me feel uncomfortable. One time I got into a huge fight with the neighborhood kids and my sister, so I stopped playing with them and decided to pay Sheila a visit. Sheila seemed off, like she didn't really want me to be there. She had these pink see-through glasses, and I remember I could see purple makeup, but now that I think about it, it might have been a bruise. From the background, I could hear her boyfriend say, "Let her come in, I have a painting for her." Sheila reluctantly let me in. The entire apartment was dark, all the blinds were closed, and it was super messy inside. Her boyfriend then handed me a painting he made of Winnie the Pooh. It wasn't very well drawn, and I don't really even like Winnie the Pooh that much, but he says, "For you, you are cute like Winnie the Pooh." I say thank you and quickly forget, and start looking for the puppy. Once I find the puppy, I begin to pet it and cuddle it, when I hear from behind something that I now know as moaning. I turn to see, and Sheila and her boyfriend are full-on making out. I remember it very clearly because I had never seen anyone, for example my parents, kissing so sloppy and with tongues. I felt embarrassed and just looked away and continued to play with the dog and pretend that I wasn't paying attention. But it continued for so long. I turned around once more, and he was fondling her breasts. At this point, I felt very weird and just tell her that I needed to go and leave. Fast forward a few days later and it's my birthday. Sheila comes over to drop off my birthday gift, and it's a porcelain doll. I pretended to like it and thanked her, and then go back to playing with my friends. I can hear my mom talking with her at the doorway, and my mom keeps saying no over and over again. She seems like she's getting angry, but still trying to keep her composure. Finally, she shuts the door and gets back to the party. A few days later, I tell my mom that I'm going to go to Sheila's to play with her dog. She tells me no, and to go play with the neighborhood kids instead, and she doesn't want me going with Sheila anymore. I don't think much of it, and I go to play with the kids instead. Then fast forward a few weeks, and I stop by at Sheila's just to see that the apartment is empty. The blinds are open, and I can see the apartment is empty inside. Fast forward to today, and my mom tells me something that shocked me. That day at my party, Sheila was asking if she could take me to Beijing with her, that she would buy me whatever I wanted, and that she just wanted to show her family how a Mexican kid looked so much like them. I guess because I looked Asian in her eyes? She kept telling my mom that I could be a model, and that she could possibly help me become one as well. My mom thought she was joking at first, but Sheila was persistent. My mom said she basically had to shove her out the door because she wasn't leaving or taking no for an answer. I'm not sure what Sheila wanted with me, if that was even her real name. I just hope wherever she is, that she's okay. I hope she never truly meant to hurt me. I often like to walk around as the sun starts to rise so that I can look at the pretty sky and have a chance to relax for a little while before the rest of the world around me starts to wake up. I particularly like to go on these walks when the weather is nice and warm so that I can walk on the bike path, with trees and the lake to keep me company. This has always helped me to feel much more connected to nature. One morning, around 5:30, I walked out my front door and was feeling really positive, excited, and peaceful. I made my way down towards the lake and bike path, listening to music and smoking a bowl as I walked. The sky was still that deep medium blue that it gets when the sun will be up in the next 45 minutes or so. I walked the few blocks to the bike path and turned south to head towards an area that felt about as magical as a place could, considering how close it was to the train tracks. I finished the bowl I'd packed a few minutes before my feet were officially on the bike path, and I started looking for a place to repack it. I looked ahead and to my right, and find that there is still a set of picnic tables, as there had been a couple of years prior when I'd left for college. I was about 10 feet away from the picnic table when a man sat up on the bench. Apparently he had been lying down on the bench. He looked at me, smiled, and stood up. I hesitated, worried about what was about to happen. He walked over to me, holding his arms out, slid his hands between my arms and my sides, then to the small of my back, as he moved in closer and hugged me. I moved away, and he opened his mouth to talk. "It's been so long, my friend." As he spoke, I realized his voice sounded familiar. We'd walked together along the bike path for a few minutes before he started veering off the path a bit. I stood there on the path, not sure what he had in mind. He started trying to pressure me to follow him closer to the water, to a more secluded place. And as he talked more, I took in more of his body language. I then realized I knew where I had met him. He had been that creepy 40-something-year-old who had been living on my floor in my dorm during my second year of college and had been sexually harassing my roommate's then girlfriend. It was in July or June. It was late in the evening and the sun was nearly set. I was sitting outside the back with my mother. I got up and walked a few feet over to the edge of a bank and looked over to the side of our house. I wasn't expecting to see anything, but over by the hedge of trees, I saw a very distinct white orb. It was maybe the size of about 3 golf balls. Sorry if this is a bad description, but it was perfectly orb-shaped, and it was glaring white, like looking at the sun. I literally just caught a glimpse of it. It moved very erratically, and then it moved above the trees and under onto the other side of my neighbor's yard. The minute I saw it, it left, which makes me think that it didn't want me to see it. In total, I saw it for about 3, maybe 5 seconds. My dad said it was a lightning ball, but I don't think it was, just because I remember that summer I was reading a lot about aliens and paranormal stuff, and I was also feeling really bad and anxious. And I think it's weird that I saw that after I had been looking into that kind of stuff. I honestly don't have a clue what it was, and I'm hoping that maybe someone here might know something, or have seen something similar. A close friend of my mother's used to live in a fairly large split-level home with an odd layout. After opening the front door to this abode, one would be confronted with a long set of steps that led to the second floor. The most essential parts of the house were on the second floor, but there were a couple of bedrooms on the ground floor. I had always found this place to be subtly off-putting and quite uncanny. Every time I visited it, I found its residual energy hard to shake off, so to speak. The feeling that it left me with would often bleed into the next couple of days. No matter where I was, my surroundings still felt like that house for a little while before the effect wore off. I experience this sort of thing with most places I visit, but the aura of this house was particularly strong. When I was about 5, my mother and I visited the home. After we were all settled in, and my mom was having an involved and lively conversation with her friend in the kitchen, I had a sudden urge to explore every inch of the strangely configured house. The kitchen and living room were at the top of the initial set of stairs, and everything else was to my right. I followed a long corridor with several dens and bedrooms on either side of it. There was also a large bathroom and a narrow set of stairs that led to the ground level. On the first level, there was a lot of cheap faux wood paneling, 2 small rooms, and another small bathroom. I remained in and around the corridor on the second floor for a while, and found seemingly endless things to explore. The house didn't even look that big from the outside, and I was baffled at the discrepancy between its interior and exterior. I wandered into one of the dens, which was the last room on my left. It had a lot of beautiful natural light and a fully mirrored wall, which might have been a closet with sliding mirror doors. Next to the mirror, there was something hanging on a narrow wall that caught my attention. It was a stark white mask. It could have been painted wood, but it also might have been ceramic. Its face was round and had very chubby cheeks. Its tiny mouth was closed and had cherry red lips that smiled slightly. Its eyes were also very tiny and almond-shaped. I interpreted the features to be male. This mask seemed notably out of place. The house was unusual, but its decor was typical of suburbia in the mid-1980s. It also had a nautical vibe because the husband of Mom's friend was a sailor. The mask looked like it had teleported straight out of the 15th century of China. A more appropriate setting for the artifact would have been in a museum or at least a fancier house. I stood there and stared at it for a while, and gradually became a little lightheaded. I felt inexplicably drawn to its smooth, plump white face and Mona Lisa smile. At some point, Mom and her friend found me in the mirrored room. One of them asked me what I was doing in there all by myself, took my hand, and led me into the kitchen for a late lunch. In the following years throughout my childhood, I would sometimes think of the mask and fall into a brief trance-like state whenever it entered my mind. Sometimes I would dream of it. Nothing would really happen in these dreams. I would just be standing there and my surroundings would change. Often I would find myself in my parents' bedroom or wandering the split-level house. The aura of the mask would be present and I would feel slightly lightheaded as before. Whenever I dreamed of the mask, the feeling of the house and of the mask would be impossible to get rid of the following day or two. Sometimes I found it unsettling, as well as mesmerizing, but never figured out why. I can't remember how old I was, but between the ages of 7 and 10 approximately, I would ask my mom if she remembered seeing a mask at the split-level home. I would describe it in detail, and my mom would always look puzzled, suggest that I may have seen it at someone else's house, and assume that my memory was faulty. I asked her about it several times periodically throughout my preteen years, and each time, she would have no recollection of me asking about it previously. Without fail, she would suggest that I saw it somewhere else, and that my little 5-year-old memory was unreliable. One day I was frustrated and asked Mom to ask her friend if she ever had a white Asian mask with a chubby face and small red lips in her suburban home in the 80s. The answer was no. No one remembered this mask. Okay, so my family and I moved into an old house around 6 or 7 years ago, and for a year or two everything was normal. However, when my little brother was born, strange things started happening around the house. I remember walking into the kitchen one day after school to get a glass of water, and I happened to look over toward the basement door. Right at the entrance leading down to the basement, I saw a black figure that was probably around 4 feet wide and 6 feet tall. I remember looking at the figure for 30 seconds, and then I looked away to grab my glass of water, almost forgetting what I came into the kitchen for, and then it was gone. Later in the evening, I told my stepdad about the experience that I had a few hours earlier, and he looked at me and said that he too saw the same exact figure earlier in the morning, in the same exact spot. We both still can't explain it, and it scares us even to this day. I'll have more of my experiences posted soon, and I would like some advice if you have any. I've known my house was haunted my entire life. My family knows it as well. My mom always told me they can't hurt you. The entities have always targeted me as I'm an only child. I've seen and heard things that I can't explain all my life. They seem to enjoy my fear and feed off of it. They use the stairs to torment me the most. For years, I heard what sounded like someone walking up and down the stairs. I knew it wasn't a parent because I used to open my door when I was almost positive it was my dad, and no one was ever there. Also, it would happen continuously for a few minutes or up to an hour straight. Up and down, up and down. It was different some nights. Sometimes it would be like someone was running up and down the stairs. Sometimes it would be like really slow and I could hear each and every step. I would always feel like it was coming to get me, and it always happened around 12 to 3 a.m. One time it was so loud I started crying out of sheer terror. I was too scared to leave my room and run to my parents, so I just sat in bed shaking, absolutely terrified. My parents said they didn't hear it the next day. I still don't understand how it didn't wake them up. It was as if someone was wearing heavy boots, stomping up each step. The first floor at night was another story. That's where everything happened. As a kid, I used to sprint down, grab what I needed as fast as possible, and then run right back up to my room. It was terrifying. I always felt as if someone was standing right behind me watching every move I made. I would get chills and my heart would race. I tried to never show my fear, because I knew whatever it was enjoying when I was afraid. My friends were always terrified of my house as well. Going down for any reason was always a joint effort. They would never go downstairs alone. One of the worst experiences that has happened occurred one random night when I went down to get a snack. I was in front of the fridge, and all of a sudden a horrible feeling came about. It literally felt like someone was breathing down my neck. I felt pure hatred, like it really wished it could hurt me. I still remember the feeling. I sunk in fear and realized I had to run. I ran as fast as I could back to my room and closed the door. Not even a minute later, I heard it running up the stairs after me. I didn't sleep that night. I still get chills thinking about it. As I got older, I got used to its games and stopped feeding into them. I started to sleep with the TV on pretty loud, so I didn't hear the stairs. I've learned that I needed to completely ignore their attempts to stir me. If I got afraid, I would repeat over and over in my head for it to go away. I haven't experienced anything in years because of this. I guess they got bored from not getting a terrified reaction out of me anymore, since I'm no longer a kid. I'm just glad it stopped, honestly. There is a child entity in my parents' house that my entire family has seen except for me. I haven't lived there full time in many years, but the sightings started years before I moved out. The first time I heard of this boy who supposedly lives in the house was roughly 12 years ago, shortly after moving in. My little brother, 5 or 6 at the time, claimed he saw a dark-skinned boy in the bathroom wearing farm clothes. My brother only told my mom the story. Months later, my sister, 11 at the time, told my mom she saw a boy playing with her toys. What really scared us is that both siblings had the same description of the boy that they saw, but neither sibling had spoken to each other about it. Since then, both parents and my other sisters, 5 family members in total, claim to have seen and heard him on several occasions. He has never caused any trouble or acted maliciously. My house has no history, and we moved in when the house was freshly built. I don't know if I believe there's a spirit in that house, but I do know that my family truly believes it, and they aren't pulling a prank on me. If this boy is there, why do you think he never appeared to me? Alternatively, do you think this is some form of shared false memory between my family? My family and I were driving from Ohio to Wyoming one holiday season to visit family about 10 years ago. Due to storms farther north, we traveled straight west instead of northwest at first and split the trip at Omaha, staying the night before heading up through Nebraska and into South Dakota. Once we were far enough north, we turned west onto I-90. At that point, it had been over an hour since we saw anywhere that might have had public restrooms, and we were on state routes, so no rest areas. Those of you who've traveled with a young kid know that's close to their bladder/boredom's limit, and our daughter was begging to stop somewhere to pee. South Dakota was similarly deserted, or even worse as we headed west. Finally, we reached a desperately needed rest stop, as my, at the time, 5-year-old and I both needed to pee by then. Just as we pulled in, the truck that had been following us for a while pulled in too. I didn't think too much of it at first until I started to open my door. My head was turned to the right where the truck was parked a couple spots over. My eyes met the driver's, and I just shivered. He was a skinny white guy, straggly gray-brown beard, and dark eyes. I could see that he was wearing a dingy, dirty blue plaid shirt. He got out of his 90s brown and cream truck and started rummaging in the bed. I told my husband that I didn't want to go into the rest stop alone because of the guy, and the weird feeling I got from him. He thought I was being a little silly, but agreed to come in with us. At that point, the next stop was Wall, South Dakota, about 100 miles away according to the huge billboards we passed advertising it. He figured he'd better empty his bladder even though he didn't particularly feel the need. I grabbed our daughter and we headed inside, followed by the guy who had finished rummaging at his truck but wasn't carrying anything when I glanced back. My daughter and I did our business in the women's restroom and headed back out to the lobby. As expected, my husband was already out there since he didn't have a small human to chaperone. The old guy was in the tiny lobby area. He was just standing there staring at my husband. My husband rushed us back out to the car, and as we were buckling in, he locked the doors. Then he told me that the guy hadn't even gone into the restroom and was just standing in the lobby the whole time. He agreed with me that we might have just had a close call, and he was glad it hadn't been just me and our daughter in there. However, that's not the end of the story. Remember how I mentioned Wall and that it was 100 miles away? Well, that was 100 miles of pretty empty landscape, but a decent number of turnoffs from the interstate. We didn't see the truck following us and thought the whole episode was behind us. Except when we stopped in Wall to grab lunch and some road snacks, plus look around at this homey but fun little tourist trap in the middle of nowhere, we saw the guy in the store not even 20 feet from us. Same face, beard, dirty plaid shirt. Thankfully, we'd already eaten, so since he was staring at us again, we quickly paid for our snacks and trinkets and got the hell out of there. Thankfully, we didn't see him again, but I was seriously creeped out until we reached our relatives in Wyoming safely, with no other sight of that truck. This was 5 to 6 years ago. After meeting with a couple friends who were stationed near my bar, my friend Robin and I decided to end girls' night early, 1 a.m. I'm horrible with street names, so bear with me. We went to Rocket Bar, so you can know it was near there. We got in the car and started pulling out. We were driving a bit slow because we weren't too familiar with the area, so we didn't want to miss any turns. I had the window rolled down because, when I drink, I get a bit flushed. The street we were on was a bit dead at the time, but we heard a yell and some loud crying. It was clearly a lady's voice, so we slowed down to see what was going on. Robin was driving and I was in the passenger seat. On our right, we saw this lady stumble out of the street holding her chest and crying. Robin locked the doors and cautiously rolled my window up, leaving only an inch open. Thank God. This lady came right up to my window and said, "I need help." I asked, "What's wrong, honey?" And she kept repeating, "I need help," over and over and over again. Me being a naive idiot, put my hand on the door like I'm about to open it, only to be grabbed by Robin whispering, "Do not open that door." The lady, who has been mumbling, "I need help," repeatedly like she was slurring, saw Robin stop me, and her eyes open wide as hell, and she starts yelling, "I need help!" We jumped and said, "Okay, how can we help you?" She shoved her finger in the cracked part of the window and screamed, "Let me in!" We started yelling, "Stop that," and the lady started yanking at my door handle. Robin said hell no, and then we started pulling away. I kid you not, the next 30 seconds were entirely terrifying. This lady yelled at someone, "They're leaving," and then we saw 2 guys run out from a car parked a few cars behind us on the right. Robin sped away like a scene in an action movie. We looked in the rearview mirror and saw the 3 of them standing in the street. So, ladies and gentlemen, please be careful. I can't imagine what could have happened to my dumbass if it weren't for my friend. I know it's in some of us to want to help, but there are a lot of evil people out there who disguise themselves to do us harm. Be aware of your surroundings, and lock your doors in DC. I was driving late at night on I-90 between Deer Lodge and Missoula, Montana. I'm originally from Seattle. I was driving back to Seattle after visiting family in Bozeman and Billings. The stretch of freeway between Deer Lodge and Missoula has some weird small mountain towns along the side, occasionally interrupted by large truck stops. Anyway, it's about 11:30 at night, and I'm on my way to my hotel in Missoula when I notice that I need to get some gas for my car. I stop off in this random small town with one gas station with a 24-hour pump. It had a convenience store attached to it, but it was closed. I get this really weird vibe from the station as soon as I pulled up to the pump. I hadn't turned my car off yet. I had just put it in park and the engine was still running. I was about to shut off my car when out of the corner of my eye, I see some dark figure come from the side of a closed convenience store and start running toward my car. Some instinct in my head kicks in, I put my car back into drive, and I got the hell out of there. I look back in my rearview mirror to see the figure chasing my car for a few seconds. By that time, I make the turn that gets me back onto the freeway. I found a brightly lit truck stop about 10 miles down the road where I filled up my car. Needless to say, that weirded me the hell out for the rest of my drive to Missoula and Seattle. I've heard it before, and I experienced it that night. Strange things happen in the mountains. As an edit, thank you for all your comments below, some clarification on some things to the story. It happened in 2009, so while smartphones did exist, they weren't as prevalent or as good as they are today. Even with my flip phone I had at the time, I was getting next to no signal on it. I simply chose the first place that said it had a 24-hour gas pump. Secondly, the events at the gas station happened in a span of about 10 to 15 seconds. Yes, it happened that quick. Arrive, park, go to turn off car, see dark figure run toward my car, put the car back into drive, burn rubber out of there. See dark figure chasing my car, tear ass up the on-ramp back onto the freeway. So about as fast as you could read those sentences. That's how fast it happened. Finally, someone mentioned the story of the Wendigo. I've heard about those stories before, but I wasn't up isolated in the mountains. This was less than a 30-second drive from the freeway. One thing that I do know about the area of Montana is that it had a bad meth problem, and it still does as far as I know. I think the dark figure was likely a desperate meth head looking to rob someone. But after you've been driving for hundreds of miles, your brain will go to some weird spaces given some time. I'll never really know who or what that figure was, and I don't think I ever want to. So this happened to me a couple of years ago when my now husband and I were living in a townhouse in a decent area. My husband was working third shift as a corrections officer at our local corrections facility, and I was working as a waitress/bartender. It was an unusually warm night for mid-March, so I took advantage and decided to take my husband's 80-pound Alaskan Malamute, Siberian Husky mixed dog on a quick walk around the neighborhood near our complex. We got to the end of the street that leads into the complex we live on, and across the street is a Marathon gas station. I notice as the dog, Luke, stops to relieve himself that there is a guy across the street at the gas station with a case of beer in his hands. I have my phone out texting a friend and looked back up to notice the guy was near the stop sign, also relieving himself on the sign. I felt really awkward and instantly put my phone away and led Luke down the street on our path. At this point, I think the guy noticed us and he crossed the street to where Luke and I had just been. I hear him walking a few feet behind me, and just keep my head down staring at my phone, with Luke glued to my hip. After about 10 seconds, I hear this guy's steps getting closer. Luke realizes there is someone behind us, and he stops in his tracks. Mind you, he is a big dog compared to my 5'2" self, but I can handle him pretty easily, and he is very well trained by my husband. But I noticed his ears were perked up, and his tail was straight up. I was glad that he was aware of our surroundings, but I still wanted to keep moving and away from this guy. I don't know, I just got a weird feeling. This guy finally catches up, so I tighten my grip on Luke's leash and pull him closer to me, and step into the grass to allow this guy to pass us and keep Luke out of his way. Does this guy keep going and pass? Nope. When I thought he was about to pass us, I stuttered out a small apology because Luke was pulling on his leash a little to investigate this guy, and most people did get intimidated by him just by his size. He is massive for a dog, in my opinion. The guy stops and just stares at me for a minute, long enough for me to smell the cigarettes and booze rolling off of him, and to notice he is probably in his mid to late 20s. Dark hair, scruffy looking, and just dirty. He smiles and then finally seems to notice Luke trying to get at him, and asks, "Oh, cute dog, what's his name?" Instead of making up a name, I said, "Luke." He then proceeds to ask me if he can pet my dog, and before I can even give him an answer, he leans down and starts petting Luke's head. Luke did not like that. Luke jumped to hit him as a warning, and the guy backed up chuckling. I apologized and mentioned that he was very protective, and made up a lie that he was trained as my dad's former canine unit. My dad is a software developer. Instantly, I saw this guy's face change. I don't know what to call it, but he looked a little put off by it. He asked me what my name was, and I gave him a fake name. He then asked if I lived around here, and I said I was just visiting a friend of mine for the weekend. He then made a sudden step toward me, and I'm not lying when I say I have never heard my husband's dog growl in 5 years that I have been with him, but that sound came from my dog sounded like something from a nightmare. Luke's hair was spiking on his spine, and he was throwing himself back up on his hind legs and kicking his front legs at this guy. He had put himself completely between myself and the guy and was snapping at him. This freaked the dude out so much that he stumbled backwards, nearly dropping his beer. He quickly said, "Well, have a nice night, cutie," which, ew, and stumbled off down the road. When I say my heart was pounding, it was deafening. I grabbed Luke's leash so hard and sprinted between the buildings until I got back to my townhouse and locked all the doors and collapsed by the front door. Luke was in my face the whole time, kissing me and whining. This dog is the sweetest and most gentle creature I have ever met, and hearing him growl and seeing him react the way he did made me realize that I needed to get out of that situation, and fast. So 2 things I learned that night. Do not go out at night alone, even with my dog, because if someone wanted to get to me, they would take my dog out without a care. And 2, always listen and read your dog. If they think something is up, then trust their instinct over your own. I know this is going to sound like BS, but this story actually happened to my cousin and I in the summer of 2018. My cousin and I live pretty close to each other in the suburbs of Detroit. We both love photography and taking long drives listening to music, so that's exactly what we did on this particular day. We drove about an hour north to a small town and found an abandoned barn that was also for sale. At the time, we didn't spot any trespassing signs, so we decided to be adventurous and go check it out. Big mistake. The barn was in semi-decent condition, although the paint had begun to peel off. Structurally, it was pretty sound though, so I didn't feel uneasy about going in. I'm an avid urban explorer in Detroit, and had been in far worse buildings. Once we got inside, we somehow ended up in the basement of this barn. I immediately was getting some weird vibes. There were little girls' clothes, toys, and furniture littered through the basement of this barn. I thought it was creepy as hell, and so did my cousin. Before I continue, behind the barn was a pretty decent-sized cornfield. This cornfield backed up right to the barn, so we decided to be artsy and take a few pics of the corn stalks. I snap a few shots of my cousin, and we decide it's time to head back to the car. Walking through the first row of corn on my way back to my cousin's car, I see a vertebra in the dirt. At this point, I stop dead in my tracks in disbelief. Like, is this actually what I think it is? Or is this an animal bone of some kind? I start looking around, and crap, there were several more. They were too big to be deer. I yelled for my cousin, who was almost back to the car, to have her take a look. We both start really examining the ground, and we keep finding more and more bones. Now, for the record, I've taken a cadaver lab in human anatomy in college, so I'm very familiar with the human body. We found a fibula and a fully intact femur. That's when I started to really freak out. We decided to call the cops because we knew this was serious. We waited in the car for a good 15 minutes, totally freaking out until the cops arrived. Once the cops came, there were 2, we all started looking through the corn and nearby trash pile. The cops, I don't think, believed us, and I distinctly remember them saying they thought it was a deer carcass. That was until I found a full freaking ribcage in the trash pile, and they changed their tune real quick. The cops told us that they would need us to leave, and they were calling a full forensics team out to start collecting evidence. We left totally shaken up. On the way out, I did see a no trespassing sign, and I'm sure the cops did too, but if they didn't care, we didn't care. We gave the cops our information, but we never did hear anything from them. I also watched the news pretty close for the next few weeks, and I didn't see anything. This was one of the most creepy things I have ever experienced. When I was in the 4th or 3rd grade, I saw a UFO with my older cousin and little brother. This was in Voorhees, New Jersey, during our summer vacation. We were in a high-end apartment complex and had gone outside to play. This was in the late 90s. We had decided to first see who was out before deciding on what toys to bring out to play with. Think water guns, bikes, scooters, Pokemon cards, etc. We were going to the park first, but heard a strange, high-pitched whistling noise down the hill from our apartment building near the mailboxes. It was the kind of whistling noise that brought about a strange energy. I noticed everything seemed really quiet except for this whistling. I say whistling, but that's the closest sound we have in this world that people would collectively be able to picture. It wasn't exactly whistling. It did give me the creeps. I wasn't scared, I just felt uneasy. My older cousin decided to go and check it out. He ran down the hill, and I saw him turn his head left and stop dead in his tracks. I saw his jaw and his eyes go so big, and him tell us, "Oh my god, come look, it's a UFO." My brother and I were both younger and wary of him, since he was a known prankster and a mischievous boy. We didn't want to come, but he said you will regret not looking in such a way that I ran down the hill to go look as well. There was an apartment building blocking the view of the UFO, and so I walked slowly to where I would pass it and be standing by my cousin. As I neared the location, the whistling became louder. I started to see the UFO floating, hovering right next to the balcony of a family we knew because they had older kids who would play with us sometimes. The UFO was about the size of a large pickup truck, and it was giant and metallic, but not a metallic ball. It was spinning really fast and looked as if it should have been able to reflect its surroundings because it was so shiny and metallic, but it didn't. The whistling was this ball spinning so fast yet so slowly as well. It had that saucer thing around it, but not like huge or anything. Maybe the saucer it was spinning inside was only about 3 foot wide. But the UFO had to have a diameter of about the length of a Ford pickup truck. I was in absolute awe. I felt like I won something, like, yes, proof, and I know something my parents don't know. My brother had been calling to us, but I hadn't been paying attention. But I just told him to come and look. He was always shy and a crybaby, but he came reluctantly. I was just observing it spinning and thinking, is something observing me back? I noticed in the sky there was like a tunnel of like spinning energy or clouds or air. That tunnel went straight up into the sky and far away, and the UFO, or its copy, was on the other side, way off in the distance. My cousin wanted to throw a rock at it and tell them to get out. My little brother screamed his panic scream and told him no, and I also told him not to do that. He listened to us, but I guess they felt his hostility, and the UFO moved back and higher. My cousin said, "See, they're scared. Let's make them go," and he started screaming and saying, "Go away, get out," and my brother and I joined in. I can't remember if we started throwing rocks or not, but I don't think we did, but that part does get murky. The tunnel looked like it got bigger in size, and the UFO started looking like it was appearing in the tunnel, even though it was right in front of us still, like a delay. And we could see like snapshots of the UFO in the tunnel going up and up, somewhat like a loading bar where it's a copy, or was, and there was a loud sound and a whoosh. My little brother screamed and bolted home. The UFO was no longer in front of us, but the tunnel was still there, and we could see like a bright light and the UFO at the end of the tunnel, and then it was gone. We ran home to tell my mom. When we got there, my mom was pissed and thought my cousin and I had tricked my brother and scared him. She couldn't quite understand through my brother's hysterical crying what he was saying, only heard they made me see the aliens. We saw no aliens, and we explained this to my mom and what we saw, and I said, "Mom, it's real." I was the only girl, and my mom believed me because I wasn't one to lie. I used to keep a diary and I wrote down the experience. I forgot about it somehow, and it had honestly felt like a dream. We had moved to a new house, many, many strange things there, and I'll write a post on the huge events that caused me to look into my diary. And something absolutely terrifying and awe-inspiring happened that made me check my diary. I had asked my brother if he remembered the UFO, and he said he did. We called my uncle and cousin, and had my cousin retell the story, and all our stories matched. This is a real story, and I can actually give an exact location of where this occurred. So this happened back in 2010. I was 10 at the time. During this time, it was a snow blizzard. It hit our city out of nowhere, as our weather is known to be bipolar and have late winters. I lived with my cousins at the time. This snow blizzard went on for a while. Thick snow, freezing. This blizzard was so unexpected that no one was prepared for it. Power went out, people buying out water supplies in the stores. I remember seeing on the news that people were using barbecue grills inside their homes for warmth. This mainly occurred in the less fortunate areas. Even though we lived in apartments, we were fortunate enough to have our power on and other needed stuff. To sum up how this blizzard was affecting us, it was cold to the point that trees were falling. I lived on a giant pond, where if you go on our balcony, it would be water. Well, that was frozen. So me being the 10-year-old I was, who doesn't want to play in the snow? Me and my cousin, who was 18 at the time, played out in the snow in the daytime. We practically did that every day whenever we got bored. But one day, him and I went outside in the parking lot outside my apartment, basically in front of our home. The only difference this time was we went to go play in the snow at 6 p.m. and it had already been dark by this time because of daylight savings. We waited until it stopped snowing to go out. So we're playing like normal, building a snowman and walls, anything normal you do in the snow. We decided to attempt to make a snow wall, so we needed lots of snow for that. Now, it had been snowing heavy, and where's the best spot to get a load of snow? Off of the cars that haven't moved, of course. We start building this wall, and I'm taking snow off of trunks of cars. As there's thick layers, it's the easiest spot to obtain a chunk of snow. After a few back and forward of getting snow off cars and bringing it to the wall we were building, I noticed that I hadn't touched my sister's boyfriend's car. And wow, that was a lot of snow since they hadn't left in a few days. I told my cousin to go get that snow. We were walking toward my sister's boyfriend's car, and we were then at it. We arrived at the trunk, and as soon as I grab a big 2-armful of snow, a very loud click is heard. In confusion, I look around and then look down, and then around the car my cousin and I is a green light in the shape of a circle around us. Now this is freaky enough in that moment. I decided to look up to see what the source of this light was, and what do you know, nothing was above us. So after noticing this light and nothing above us, I look at my cousin and we start running home. I'm freaked out running, looking around everywhere as I run home, checking my surroundings. I see a tree fall in the distance. Yeah, it was cold like I mentioned earlier. This was common during that little blizzard. But for this to happen at that moment of this weird phenomenon adds just more chills to the story for me. My cousin and I get inside, and inside was my sister and his sister cooking. We rush in, freaked out, and they're questioning what's going on with us. We explain the chain of events that went down, and what do you know? Just like anyone who hears these types of stories, they said we were stupid and crazy and we needed to stop playing. Okay, they didn't believe us. Brush it off. Who would expect anyone to? Now, for the rest of that night, my cousin and I just kept peeking out the window very often. Our minds could not be clear of that. We stayed up all night, shook, kept peeking out the window. We played Black Ops all night until about 7 a.m., still peeking out the window every 5 minutes or so. This was not something we were just going to forget, let alone make up. To this day, he still remembers this moment, a moment that should have been pure normal fun, into a creepy extraterrestrial sighting, which I believe. I'm now 18, but the details are still clear to me to this day, as I have thought about it often ever since that moment. It's not something you just forget. My cousin and I talk about this here and there when we see each other, but man oh man, what a freaky incident. I don't really expect you to believe me, but I've had this on my mind for way too long. It's just something too unreal to keep to myself. I've come here to share my experience. I'm looking for thoughts on this. What are your thoughts? What could it have been? Why did it target us? Why didn't it do anything to us? To this day, I have one too many unanswered questions, and they will never be answered, and I'm just going to have to live with that. This happened 5 years ago. I was hanging out with 3 of my friends at this place up on a hill overlooking the ocean. It was a few minutes before sunset, and the sky looked so beautiful. When out of nowhere, I noticed a small ball of light floating over the ocean, far away below. It was floating closer to the surface, just moving in a straight line, and at first we thought it was probably a small fishing boat, because it was too far to see it clearly. We could not really tell how fast it was going either. And then suddenly, it started to move upwards, and it did not stop. It just kept going up and up, until the sky grew darker and it became too small for us to see. Up to today, we still can't figure out what it really was. We did not initially think it was extraterrestrial in nature, because it had never occurred to us something like that would ever happen where we live. But as the years passed, and we still had not figured out what it was, I started to wonder if it had actually been an extraterrestrial object, and we had been too stunned and confused to take our phones out and record it. I was about 8, and at the time I was living at my grandmother's house in the suburbs of Chicago. Every now and then, my cousin would come over to visit. This one night he was sleeping over, and we stayed up late talking. It was about 3 a.m. when something extremely bright suddenly covered the whole entire window on the right of us. We both went into pure silence, quickly threw ourselves under the blanket, and hugged each other for what felt like ages. The light was still so bright, even under the covers. We made a plan that we would run on the count of 10 to my grandparents' room. After this part seems a blur to me, but I remember ending up downstairs in a panic, for whatever reason. My grandparents and mom rushed downstairs and just ended up getting pissed at us because we were up so late that we had woke them up. We tried to tell them, but they wouldn't listen. And the story isn't that big, but it's still out of the norm, and I'm still curious as to what happened that night. It happened on the 9th of July in 2011 in Slovakia. I'm Czech and I have relatives there. In a village near the Low Tatras, the observation started around 10 p.m. I was outside the house alone, although we had a family gathering that day, but those who didn't drive away already went to a village pub. The sky was without any clouds that night, and I saw the moon. The garden of that house is so huge that the part of it is also serving as a small field. I was standing at the corner of the garden, near the road, enjoying the fresh night air, and had a good view of the sky beyond the house. Suddenly, I noticed small, red, regularly flashing lights coming from that direction. First I thought it was some kind of airplane, but as the lights were getting closer quite slowly, I realized I could see the shape of the object. It was a triangle. When the triangle got even closer, I saw there was another light on the bottom side, and I also noticed that it was flying very low, not too high above the rooftops, and was quite large. Despite the low altitude and abnormal size, I heard silence. The movement of the object was still very slow. I was curious, and waited until the triangle reached the sky above the house and garden. Then I finally saw that it was so large, it hid the sky view from me. I had a perfect view of the bottom side. There were 3 big blue round lights at the angles of the triangle. Each blue light was surrounded by a circle of small white lights. The blue lights were also connected by 3 lines of medium-sized lights, smaller than the blue but bigger than the white, which were changing color from white to red and back. The lights illuminated the triangle good enough for me to notice it was from black metallic-like material with blue-green reflections. My curiosity turned to fear when the triangle stopped flying further and remained hovering above the garden, but lower than before. I went close to the house to hide under the roof because I thought it maybe wanted to land in the garden. It went down again, this time even more than when it stopped, and at that moment, I knew the triangle was too big to land in the garden. I was relieved a little bit. The triangle stayed hovering about 10 minutes. I also had a weird feeling like if something was telling me to go right under the triangle, but I didn't do it. But it could have just been a feeling. Then the triangle started moving again and slowly flew away. Note 1, I couldn't take photos or record it because my mom had borrowed my camera to take pictures of family gatherings and had completely discharged both of my camera's batteries. The gathering started before noon and she was taking photos the whole time. Note 2, the day after the sighting, I and my parents were returning from the mushroom picking and we saw lots of people on 2 fields before the village. My dad stopped the car because he wanted to know what had happened. I got out from the car too, and I noticed stripes of burned earth randomly placed over 2 fields. One was potato and the second was grain. There were also fruit trees broken in half on the edge of 2 of the fields. I can't prove it was connected to my observation, but it certainly was interesting. I've had creepy encounters at Wally World before, but usually I was there for more than 15 minutes. I'm a girl though. I'm not exactly thin or small. I have a very young looking face. I also have super short hair. It's what would be normally considered a boy style, but I love it. I also tend to wear boys' clothes for comfort when I'm working out or, just running errands. This happened this week. I had a rough week, and though I wasn't feeling sick or anything, I did feel drained. I had slept in, but I needed to run to Walmart for a couple of groceries. I knew exactly what I needed. There were a total of 5 things, and I knew exactly where they were. I didn't intend on staying long, as, again, I was exhausted. Now, since I wasn't feeling the greatest, I opted for comfy clothes. Some baggy sweats, a t-shirt, a baseball cap to hide the little hair that I didn't feel like dealing with, and a loose-fitting cardigan that would keep me warm, but not too warm. I had gotten everything I needed, and went to a self-checkout lane. As I was scanning my groceries, I saw a man with baggy clothes and long, unkempt dark hair walking down the front of the store. His eyes were looking everywhere, but then he looked at me. Our eyes locked for maybe a second, and then he went behind me into the lane. He made a sudden change in his direction and passed inches behind me when there was plenty of space. While I was ringing up my items, he pretended to be looking at Pokemon and Magic the Gathering cards. I myself love Pokemon and Magic the Gathering, but this guy wasn't really even looking at them like he was trying to buy them. Now, when I'm trying to buy cards, I'm looking at all the different boosters, decks, gift boxes to see if there's anything I'm missing or that might be helpful. This guy was sort of just staring in the general direction of the cards. Then he came around to the self-checkout lane in front of me. From my side, it looked like he was buying something because for some reason these lanes faced each other. At this point, I had finished my purchase and put everything back in the cart. When I passed by his lane, he was pretending to look at the candy behind the belt at his self-checkout lane, but he was staring at them just like he was the cards. Then I booked it. I had used the self-checkout on the opposite side of the store that I had parked on, as it was simply more convenient. I actually almost hit someone with my cart and apologized. I checked to make sure that I wasn't being followed on my way into the parking lot too. Thankfully, I wasn't, and I was able to store my groceries and the cart I was using and get out of there safely. I locked the car doors as soon as I got to my car, in case he did follow me into the parking lot and I didn't see him. I had considered going somewhere else, but I changed my mind and went straight home. I live on an Air Force base, so not everyone could make it through the gate, and I made sure to keep an eye out for any cars that could be following me. I considered that he might have been trying to figure out what my gender is. People will stare at me with this look on their face. Usually it's a confused look, because they're trying to figure out if I'm a girl or a boy. However, this guy wasn't doing this. I did consider that he might have been high. There is a serious drug problem in the town I live in. However, that doesn't explain why he beelined it to me. I was only there for 15 minutes tops. I was on a mission to get what I needed done and go back home. I do keep a handgun in my car, but that was in my car and wouldn't have helped me at all if he had caught me in the parking lot. My husband, who recently deployed, told me to keep a taser on me. It's a disguised taser, so you wouldn't know it by looking at it. I honestly didn't think a quick trip for groceries would be such a big deal. Next time, I'll be more careful and more prepared. It seemed like he was hovering around me trying to figure out something, examining me. I just didn't care to stick around and figure out what it was. So I'll start this off by saying that my parents both worked when I was younger, so sometimes I would be alone at the house. This happened when I, male, was around 8 years old. I was home alone in the afternoon when knocking on the front door of the house started. I was told explicitly not to open the front door, but whoever it was kept knocking and ringing the doorbell. Young me thought maybe this was important, so I opened the door to be greeted by 2 adult men. They each started asking me questions that I barely remember, things like if my parents were home or if I had any siblings. I was intimidated by them, as they were 2 grown men, so I was hesitant to open the door all the way and backed up if they stepped closer. They said they had a meeting with my parents and needed to come in to wait for my parents to come home, but I told them no, closed the door, and locked it as well. This seemed to anger them, as they went back to knocking and ringing the doorbell. I was extremely freaked out, and I ran into my bedroom and hid under my covers. Sometime later, as I don't remember when exactly, my parents got home and I told them what happened. This still freaks me out, as they said they weren't expecting anyone. I haven't heard of any kidnappings from the area where I grew up, but I am creeped out to this day about what could have happened if I wasn't hesitant every time they moved closer to my door. This happened last summer. With my dad gone and my mom in a bad mental state, I decided to leave my apartment life and go back to live with her until she was in a better place mentally. It's a ranch-style house with a basement. There are 3 bedrooms. One was my mom's, then my old room, which was a total mess, and my sister's old room, which was basically empty. My sister's room window faced the streets. I took the basement because I always wanted that to be my room, and now I finally had the chance, so why not? So everything was good. I started my new job, enjoying the basement life, and started seeing my mom get better again. One night I was shaken awake. I was startled, and my eyes dart wide open to see my mom. She whispered, wake up, there's someone in your sister's room." My heart sank. I was terrified beyond belief and couldn't believe what she had just said. I never thought I'd be in a situation like this. So I quickly get up from my futon and look for a weapon to use. I saw my dad's practice katanas, so I unsheathed one and made my way upstairs as quick as I could. The closer I got to my sister's room, I could hear something making noise in there. I placed my hand on the doorknob and readied my weapon the best I could. Almost unwillingly, I turned the knob and rushed into the room to see that nobody was in the room, but somebody was at the window trying to break in. I froze in fear for a second, and my mind jumbled on what to do. I realized that I had to get this guy, so I ran as fast as I could outside to the front, but he was gone. I didn't know which way he went. We live in a regular neighborhood, so we could have either ran up the street or down it, or hopped into somebody's backyard. Admittedly scared, I backed off, went back in the house, and locked everything I could. So, yeah, Not a terribly scary experience, but a creepy one in my honest opinion. I can still see that creepy black silhouette every time I look out that window. I don't really know if this is the right subreddit, but I feel like I need some advice as to what this means. Over the last several months, me and my fiance have noticed that when we get home, our welcome mat will be in different positions than when we left it. The best way I can describe it is that it looks like when an Amazon person tries to hide a package under the mat, but there's nothing there. It's as if someone was looking to see if we left a key under there. I have a picture of it, but I don't know how to add it on here. Anyways, do you think that someone could possibly be trying to case my house? This happened to me this summer, and I still feel kind of uncomfortable talking about it, but I want to know what you think. Sorry if this isn't the correct subreddit, I'm still getting used to Reddit. So it was a Saturday morning of a big Czech rave party, and I was chilling with my friends in the camp, drinking and chatting, and just enjoying a sunny day miles away from reality. At one point, I noticed a guy next to us leaning on his white car. He was tall and pretty fat, wearing a white baggy shirt, 90s style, and I think I saw him watching us. But this happens all the time on these parties, so I didn't think much of it. We continued drinking, and then my friend asks, anyone want some shrooms? And I replied, yup, but only 3. You know I only eat 3 or 7. These are psilocybe bohemica, pretty weak strain, but I don't need much. As soon as I ate them, that guy walked to our camp and asked, do you guys want a cigarette? Free cigarettes for all the good people. And then he threw a cigarette at all of my friends, except me. Not sure why, but I knew it was going to happen. Weird feeling. Then he had a little chat with my friends. I remember him saying, I've only got one rule, and it's rocking it badly. Then looked me straight in the eyes and said, I know what it's like to be completely empty. The fear was building up in me like crazy. I wasn't able to say a word, and he had this huge grin on his face. He hugged one of my friends, looked back at me, talking directly to me. He said, he's such a good guy, a real one. He's not playing anything, just being himself. My friend said, yeah, and they hate me for it. And the guy replied, boy, they love you for it. That's actually true. He's kind of a rough guy, but I do love him for his attitude. After this, I knew what was up, but why was he doing it? I approached my girlfriend and sat on the ground next to her. I was looking for comfort because I felt more or less distressed. Shrooms were starting to kick in also. So I was sitting next to her, stroking her thigh, and he walked past us and just mumbled, big love, huh? Then he informed us that he had bought himself a new pair of headphones and insisted on how comfortable they were to the ears, and pushed me to try them on. So I tried them, and there was a song playing. It was a hardtech remix of Nancy Sinatra, and I put them in the ear just as she was singing My Baby Shot Me Down. I was sitting next to my girlfriend. It almost killed a part of me. He let me listen to the hardtech part for a second, and then he took them away from me and said, let's see how they fit to him, and gave them to my friend who was just asking normal stuff like how much they were, etc. All the time, he was just smiling at me like crazy. Then another weird guy appeared, and he was asking the guy what's up. He replied, come turn me off already, and the guy just shook his head and left. I need to mention that sometimes between those events he whispered to me, just never doubt. At this point, I was completely terrified. I couldn't even breathe well. I was white as a wall and there was a cold sweat all over me. I needed to leave. I stood up. I wasn't really able to walk straight, and I wandered to the field. My girlfriend was following me. She was asking me what was up, and I was repeating 2 things. Sorry, honey, they hypnotized me, and I'm just a little tick and I deserve to die. She was comforting me, telling me it was going to be okay. I said that she didn't understand, that I came here to die. It was like a weird psychedelic drama going on. I told her that there were 2 options. 1, she was going to leave me, or 2, we will never be able to go to another party ever again. And she said, honey, I don't want to leave you. And I replied, so go with me there, and I pointed to some random spot in the field. She said okay, and we went. This exact scene was repeated about 4 times when I finally said, I can't escape it, baby, I think I'm dying. It was so hard to walk, to breathe, to stay awake. So I collapsed on the ground, and I was feeling like in a grave. I saw some people above me with closed eyes. They were like policemen telling me,
"We got you finally, you scum."
I was so scared to die. My girlfriend said she was going to get help, but I begged her to stay. I was lying there, assuming I was dying. I felt everything leaving. From time to time, I thought something like, "I'm the driver who's going to get my friends home." And the policeman said something like,
"Well, they can live without you.
"What about my mom?"
No one's going to miss you."
So I accepted it, and I was ready to finally die. I really wanted to at this point. From that moment, everything in front of my closed eyes turned bright blue. I thought, is it coming now? But I just heard my girlfriend come back with my old friend that helped me to get through a lot of psychedelic stuff. They were sitting around me, and she was asking him about why this happens to me, and he was answering so nicely. It was like I heard them inside my head. It was such a pleasant moment to feel them around me. Then I woke up with the biggest blast of euphoria. I was feeling so good. My girlfriend grabbed my hand and said, "You see, you didn't die. I told you. You should trust me more." And I just gave her a huge kiss. I'm a pretty anxious guy, and I struggle to rest my muscles, so this kiss was so free and fluid. I've never given her a kiss like that before. Then all my friends were just coming, and some of them saying things like, "Hey, I'm glad to see you smiling." I was genuinely happy. My girlfriend said she needed to go to the toilet, and 2 dogs showed up demanding my attention. They didn't want a rub or something to eat. I believe they were showing me how they treat each other on practical examples, fights, making up, etc. Still checking if I'm watching them, and stopped whenever I lost my focus or got too excited, and started it all again when I had calmed down. They finished this as soon as my girlfriend was back, and she was telling me what's right, what's not. It was like clockwork. Then the final point. I walked past that guy and was smiling at him as he was earlier. He smiled at me too and said, "You're rocking it badly, my man." That's his only rule, as he stated. I'm not sure if he was just trying to abuse me, kill me mentally, or if he was in fact good and tried to show me what's wrong with me. But this experience deeply scarred me, and it's been a cause for a lot of anxieties and paranoias that I still experience to this day. Have you ever encountered someone like this? Who are these guys?